Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone is laughing at. The laughter echoed across the parking lot behind Precinct 27 as Officer Jake Morrison tossed a set of car wash supplies onto the pavement at Marcus Reed's feet. "Since you're the new guy, you can start by making every patrol unit shine," Jake said loudly enough for half the department to hear. A few officers chuckled as they leaned against their cruisers, coffee cups in hand, enjoying the show. Marcus glanced down at the bucket, the soap, and the stack of towels before calmly looking back at Jake. "Understood," he replied. His voice was steady, polite, almost surprisingly relaxed. That answer seemed to disappoint Jake more than any argument could have. "That's it?" Jake asked. No attitude, no complaints. Marcus simply picked up the supplies and walked toward the first patrol vehicle. The morning sun was already warming the asphalt, and the blue and white cruisers reflected streaks of gold across the lot. Around him, officers exchanged amused looks. Most had never seen Marcus before. He had arrived less than an hour earlier carrying a single duffel bag and a personnel folder. No grand introduction. No ceremony. Just another transfer, or so everyone assumed. "Guy doesn't talk much," Officer Ryan Pierce muttered. "Probably knows he's in over his head." Jake smirked. "Trust me, they always figure out where they belong." Marcus knelt beside the first cruiser and began washing it with careful attention. He moved efficiently, almost methodically, ignoring the comments drifting his way. Every few minutes another officer passed by with a joke. Some questioned whether he had ever worked in a real city. Others suggested he should get used to cleaning because that was all he would be trusted to do around here. Marcus responded the same way every time. A nod. A polite smile. Nothing more. The reaction frustrated Jake. He had expected resistance. He wanted the new officer to snap. Instead, Marcus behaved like someone who had absolutely nothing to prove. Inside the station, Sergeant Bill Henderson stood near the front desk reviewing paperwork. Unlike the others, he watched Marcus through the window with quiet curiosity. "Something bothering you, Sarge?" asked the dispatcher. Bill shrugged. "Just trying to figure him out." "The new guy?" "Yeah." The dispatcher laughed. "Looks pretty easy to figure out. Transfer officer. New town. Bad luck." But Bill wasn't convinced. There was something unusual about Marcus. Most transfers arrived nervous. Some arrived eager. Others arrived defensive. Marcus seemed none of those things. He carried himself with the calm confidence of someone who had already seen everything he needed to see. Outside, Jake decided to turn the humiliation up another notch. He walked over holding a clipboard. "Good news," he announced. "After you're done with the cars, somebody needs to organize the evidence storage room." Groans erupted from nearby officers. Everyone knew it was the worst assignment in the building. Jake grinned. "Looks like you volunteered." Marcus wiped his hands on a towel. "No problem." Several officers exchanged puzzled looks. Ryan leaned toward Jake. "Does this guy ever get annoyed?" Jake's smile faded slightly. "Everybody gets annoyed." Marcus continued working. The lot gradually grew quieter as patrol shifts began heading out. One by one the cruisers left, each cleaner than before. As the final vehicle pulled away, Bill stepped outside and approached him. "You settling in okay?" the sergeant asked. "Yes, sir," Marcus answered. "Everyone's been very welcoming." Bill almost laughed at the obvious understatement. "You know, most people would have pushed back by now." Marcus looked toward the station entrance where Jake stood watching. "Maybe, but not you." Marcus paused for a moment. "I've learned that the first day tells you a lot about people." Before Bill could ask what that meant, Marcus picked up his duffel bag and headed toward the building. As he disappeared through the station doors, Bill noticed a thin red stripe stamped across the corner of Marcus's personnel file. It wasn't a marking he recognized, and in 22 years of service, that almost never happened. Meanwhile, inside the station, Jake watched Marcus walk past without lowering his gaze. The veteran officer folded his arms and smiled confidently, convinced he was already putting the new guy in his place. What Jake didn't know was that hidden deep inside city headquarters was a personnel record very few people were authorized to open, and Marcus Reed had just spent his entire first morning pretending not to notice that everyone around him had already made a very expensive mistake. The rest of Marcus Reed's first day unfolded exactly the way Jake Morrison wanted. Every assignment that nobody else wanted somehow found its way onto Marcus's desk. By noon, he had organized storage shelves that had not been touched in years, sorted outdated paperwork, and inventoried equipment that most officers pretended did not exist. The message was obvious. Jake wanted everyone to see where the new officer stood in the department hierarchy. Yet Marcus continued moving through each task with the same calm focus he had shown all morning. He never complained. He never rolled his eyes. He never gave anyone the reaction they were hoping for. That only seemed to irritate Jake more. Around lunchtime, several officers gathered in the break room. The television mounted on the wall played local news while officers exchanged stories about traffic stops and weekend plans. Marcus entered quietly, carrying a bottled water and a small sandwich from a nearby deli. Conversation slowed slightly as he walked in. Not enough to be obvious, but enough to be noticed. Jake leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So tell us, Reed, what made you transfer all the way out here?" Several officers glanced toward Marcus. The question sounded casual, but everyone could hear the challenge underneath it. Marcus took a seat at the far end of the table. "New opportunity," he replied. "That all?" Jake asked. "Most people have a better story than that." Marcus shrugged lightly. Sometimes the simple answer is the correct one. A few officers exchanged amused looks. Jake laughed. "You know, people around here usually earn respect. They do not just walk in expecting it." Marcus nodded. "I agree." The answer caught Jake off guard. For a moment, he looked almost disappointed. Marcus had once again refused to take the bait. Across the room, Sergeant Bill Henderson quietly watched the exchange while pretending to read a report. The more he observed Marcus, the stranger things felt. Most officers would have become defensive hours ago. Some would have argued. Others would have tried too hard to fit in. Marcus did neither. It was as if none of this bothered him at all. Later that afternoon, Bill found himself reviewing personnel files in the administrative office. He was searching for unrelated paperwork when Marcus's transfer folder caught his attention. Curiosity got the better of him. He opened the file. The first few pages looked normal enough. Training certifications, commendations, service records. Then Bill noticed something unusual. Entire sections had been removed. Several pages were replaced with authorization notices. Others were marked as restricted access. Bill frowned. He had spent more than 2 decades in law enforcement. He had seen confidential files before, but never one with this many limitations attached to a simple transfer officer. He flipped to the final page. A bold notice appeared near the bottom. Authorized review level required. Contact City Administration for additional access. Bill stared at the wording. City Administration? That did not make any sense. Transfer records normally stayed within departmental channels. Before he could examine further, the office door opened. Bill quickly closed the folder. Jake stepped inside carrying a cup of coffee. "You still looking at paperwork?" Jake asked. "Someone has to." Jake laughed. "Well, do not waste too much time on our new guy. He will either figure things out or move on." Bill studied him for a moment. "You seem pretty determined to make his life difficult." Jake shrugged. "Everybody gets tested. If he cannot handle a little pressure, he does not belong here." Bill glanced toward the closed folder. Something told him Marcus had handled far more pressure than anyone in this building realized. As the workday approached its end, Marcus finished organizing the final evidence cabinet and prepared to leave. Most officers were already heading home. Jake crossed paths with him near the front entrance. "Same time tomorrow," Jake said with a grin. "We have plenty more exciting jobs waiting for you." Marcus adjusted the strap of his duffel bag. "Looking forward to it." Jake laughed as Marcus walked away. But from across the lobby, Bill noticed something nobody else seemed to catch. For a brief second, the city manager's executive assistant appeared near the reception desk. She glanced directly at Marcus, offered a small respectful nod, and then quickly disappeared down a hallway reserved for senior leadership. Marcus acknowledged the gesture with the slightest movement of his head before continuing toward the exit. Bill stood frozen, because in 15 years, he had never once seen that woman greet an ordinary officer that way. By the beginning of Marcus Reed's second week at Precinct 27, a pattern had emerged that everyone could see. No matter what assignment landed on his desk, he completed it without complaint. If there was paperwork nobody wanted, Marcus handled it. If there were outdated records that needed sorting, Marcus volunteered. If a report required extra attention, somehow it ended up in front of him. Jake Morrison seemed determined to keep him buried under the least glamorous tasks in the department. Every morning brought a new test. Every afternoon brought another opportunity for public embarrassment. Yet the outcome never changed. Marcus remained calm. That calmness was beginning to bother people. One Tuesday morning, Jake walked into the briefing room carrying a stack of files. Officers settled into their seats while the shift meeting began. Jake dropped the pile directly onto Marcus's desk. "Looks like somebody forgot to finish these case reviews," he announced. "Guess the new guy gets the honor." Several officers laughed. The stack was nearly 12 inches high. Enough work to keep someone busy for days. Marcus glanced at the files and nodded. "I will take care of it." Jake waited for an argument that never came. "That is all you have to say?" Marcus looked up. "Should I say something else?" A few officers exchanged surprised looks. Even Ryan Pierce had started losing enthusiasm for Jake's games. Nothing seemed to work. During the next several days, Marcus quietly completed every review. Not only that, but he identified errors that had gone unnoticed for months. Missing signatures, incorrect classifications, overlooked evidence logs. Sergeant Bill Henderson noticed first. Then others started noticing too. "How did he catch all that?" one officer asked. "I have no idea," another replied. "Half those files have been sitting around forever." Jake dismissed it publicly, but privately he was becoming irritated. Marcus was supposed to struggle. Instead, he kept making the department look better. One afternoon, Bill entered the records room and found Marcus organizing old case boxes. "You know," Bill said, leaning against a shelf, "most officers would be pretty frustrated by now." Marcus smiled slightly. "Why?" "Because you are doing everyone else's work." Marcus closed a file drawer. "Every assignment teaches you something." Bill studied him carefully. "You always this patient?" "Not always." "Then what is different now?" Marcus considered the question for a moment. "Sometimes it is better to understand a place before trying to change it." The answer stayed with Bill long after the conversation ended. Later that same day, something unusual happened. The city manager's office called the station. Reception transferred the call directly to Captain Douglas Hart. Nobody thought much about it until Hart emerged from his office looking visibly surprised. He scanned the room before his eyes settled briefly on Marcus. The look lasted less than a second, but Bill caught it. So did Jake. Hart quickly returned to his office and shut the door. Jake frowned. "What was that about?" Ryan shrugged. "Probably nothing." But Jake was not convinced. The following morning, he decided to push harder. During briefing, he assigned Marcus to inventory old equipment stored in a warehouse nearly 20 miles outside town. The task would take most of the day and offered zero visibility. Exactly the kind of assignment Jake preferred for him. "Think you can handle that?" Jake asked with a smirk. "Of course," Marcus replied. As Marcus gathered his materials and headed toward the parking lot, Bill happened to glance out the front window. Across the street sat a black SUV. It looked ordinary at first glance, except for one detail. The vehicle had government plates. Inside, two professionally dressed individuals appeared to be watching the station. When Marcus exited the building, one of them immediately picked up a phone. Bill's eyes narrowed. The SUV remained parked for only another minute before quietly driving away. That afternoon, curiosity finally got the better of him. Bill returned to Marcus's personnel file and carefully reviewed every page again. Hidden among the restricted notices was a small code printed near the bottom corner. It was not a police department classification. It was a city executive designation. Bill felt his pulse quicken. In all his years of service, only senior command staff carried identifiers like that. He stared at the code, then slowly looked toward Marcus's empty desk. For the first time, a possibility entered his mind that seemed almost impossible. What if Marcus Reed had never been sent here to learn from the department at all? What if he had been sent here to evaluate it? The following week brought a department community outreach event, the kind of public gathering where officers were expected to interact with local residents, answer questions, and present a positive image of the precinct. Families filled the town square beneath bright blue skies while food vendors lined the sidewalks and children ran between booths collecting stickers and small souvenirs. For most officers, it was an easy day away from paperwork. For Jake Morrison, it became another opportunity. The moment assignments were handed out, he made sure Marcus Reed received the least desirable position. Instead of interacting with residents at the main information tent, Marcus was assigned to manage parking logistics nearly 2 blocks away from the event. "Looks like you drew the lucky assignment again," Jake announced loudly enough for nearby officers to hear. Several chuckled. Marcus glanced at the paperwork and nodded. "I will take care of it." Jake leaned closer. You really do not know how to stand up for yourself, do you? Marcus simply smiled. Everybody contributes differently. The answer irritated Jake more than any insult could have. Throughout the morning, Marcus directed traffic, answered questions from visitors, and helped elderly residents find accessible parking. Meanwhile, officers at the main event enjoyed the attention and recognition that came with public visibility. Around noon, Sergeant Bill Henderson walked over carrying 2 bottled waters. He handed one to Marcus. You know they stuck you out here on purpose. Marcus accepted the bottle. I know. Bill blinked. That does not bother you. Not particularly. Most people would be angry. Marcus looked across the street where families were laughing and enjoying the event. Anger is expensive. I try not to spend it unnecessarily. Bill could not help smiling. Every conversation with Marcus somehow left him thinking about things differently. Before he could reply, a city council member approached from across the parking lot. Councilman Robert Hayes was one of the most recognizable officials in town. Residents frequently stopped him for photos and conversations. As he neared Marcus, something unexpected happened. Hayes immediately extended his hand. Officer Reed. Bill froze. The councilman knew his name. Marcus shook his hand politely. Good to see you again, sir. Again. Bill noticed the word immediately. The councilman smiled warmly. The city is fortunate to have you here. Marcus nodded. Thank you, sir. After a brief exchange, Hayes continued toward the main event. Bill stared after him. How exactly do you know a city council member? Marcus took a sip of water. We have crossed paths before. That is all. That is all. The answer only deepened the mystery. Later that afternoon, Jake received word that Councilman Hayes had specifically complimented Marcus's professionalism. The news spread quickly through the department. Most officers found it surprising. Jake found it irritating. By the next morning, his attitude had shifted from amusement to determination. During briefing, he singled Marcus out repeatedly. Every question became a challenge. Every assignment came with extra scrutiny. Every mistake made by anyone somehow became Marcus's responsibility to correct. Yet Marcus remained exactly the same. Calm, professional, unshaken. The behavior began producing an unintended effect. Officers who had laughed during Marcus's first week were becoming uncomfortable. Some no longer joined Jake's jokes. Others quietly started helping Marcus with assignments. Even Ryan Pierce seemed uncertain. Do you ever wonder if we got the wrong impression about him? Ryan asked one afternoon. Jake scoffed. No, because he does not act like a normal transfer. Jake slammed a file onto his desk. Exactly. Nobody is that calm all the time. Across the room, Marcus worked quietly without acknowledging the conversation. But Bill noticed something else. A sealed envelope had arrived earlier that morning. It had come directly from city administration. The receptionist had delivered it personally to Marcus. No explanation. No paperwork trail. Just a confidential package. Marcus had opened it, reviewed the contents for less than 30 seconds, and then locked everything inside his desk drawer. Bill's curiosity nearly overwhelmed him. That evening, after most officers had gone home, he passed Marcus's desk and noticed the drawer was slightly open. Inside, he caught only a brief glimpse of a document bearing an official city seal and a title line that made his heart nearly stop. He only saw 3 words before the drawer quietly closed. Leadership Transition Authorization. And suddenly, the impossible theory Bill had been considering no longer felt impossible at all. The discovery stayed with Sergeant Bill Henderson all weekend. Leadership Transition Authorization. The words replayed in his mind every time he thought about Marcus Reed. By Monday morning, Bill had convinced himself there had to be another explanation. Maybe Marcus was assigned to a special project. Maybe city administration was restructuring multiple departments. Maybe he was reading too much into a single document. Yet the moment he walked into Precinct 27, his doubts returned. Marcus was already there, seated quietly at his desk long before the start of shift briefing. A fresh stack of reports sat beside him. Officers moved through the room preparing for the day, while Marcus reviewed paperwork with the same calm focus he always displayed. Nothing about him suggested someone carrying authority. Nothing about him suggested someone important. And yet more and more unusual details kept appearing around him. During briefing, Captain Douglas Hart entered carrying a folder. Normally, he moved quickly through announcements, but this morning he paused briefly when his eyes met Marcus. The hesitation lasted only a second before he continued speaking. Most officers never noticed. Bill did. Jake Morrison did too. After the meeting ended, Jake approached Marcus's desk with another assignment. "Looks like we have a backlog of archived vehicle reports," he announced. "Guess who gets the honor?" Several officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. The routine had become predictable. Jake found unpleasant work. Marcus accepted it. Everyone watched. Marcus looked up. "I will take care of it." Jake smirked. "I figured you would." As Marcus gathered the files, Ryan Pierce quietly shook his head. "You know," he said after Marcus walked away, "I am starting to think you enjoy this more than he does." Jake frowned. "Enjoy what?" "Trying to get under his skin." Jake scoffed. "He is a transfer officer. That is all." Ryan did not look convinced. Neither did several others nearby. The department was changing. Officers who once laughed openly now seemed uncertain. They had spent weeks watching Marcus handle every challenge without losing his composure. The longer it continued, the harder it became to justify Jake's behavior. Later that afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the station. A sharply dressed woman from city administration entered carrying a sealed envelope. Conversations throughout the front office slowed immediately. Everyone recognized her. Lauren Whitaker rarely visited precincts personally. Her position placed her among the highest administrative offices in the city government. Receptionists greeted her nervously as she walked directly through the building. Officers assumed she was there to meet Captain Hart. Instead, she stopped beside Marcus's desk. The room fell silent. "Officer Reed," she said politely. Marcus stood. "Good afternoon." Lauren handed him the envelope. "The city manager asked me to deliver this personally." Marcus accepted it. "Thank you." Lauren smiled respectfully before turning and leaving. The entire interaction lasted less than 30 seconds. Yet after she disappeared through the front doors, nobody spoke for several moments. Ryan looked toward Jake. Jake stared at Marcus. Marcus calmly placed the envelope inside his desk drawer and returned to work. It was as though nothing unusual had happened at all. But everyone knew it had. Even Jake appeared unsettled. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. That evening, after most officers had gone home, Bill remained behind finishing reports. As he passed Captain Hart's office, he noticed the door was partially open. Voices drifted into the hallway. Hart was speaking on the phone. "Yes, I understand," the captain said carefully. "Everything will be ready for Wednesday." A pause followed. Then Hart added something that made Bill stop cold. "No, there have been no issues with Officer Reed. He has handled everything exactly as expected." Bill remained frozen outside the office. Exactly as expected. The phrase echoed through his mind. Because suddenly every assignment, every insult, every test Marcus had endured seemed less like random harassment and more like something being observed, evaluated, measured. And if that was true, then someone very powerful was paying close attention. The next morning, a department-wide notice appeared in every employee inbox. Mandatory all-staff meeting. Wednesday. Attendance required. No explanation. No agenda. No details. Just a time, a location, and a directive from city administration. As officers read the announcement, confusion spread throughout the precinct. But across the room, Marcus Reed simply closed the email and continued working as though he had known about the meeting all along. Wednesday arrived with a tension that seemed to settle over Precinct 27 before sunrise. Officers who normally joked through the morning moved more quietly than usual. The mandatory meeting had become the only topic anyone discussed. Speculation spread through every hallway. Some believed budget cuts were coming. Others expected departmental restructuring. A few worried about leadership changes. Nobody seemed to know the truth. Marcus Reed arrived at exactly the same time he always did. He carried a cup of coffee, greeted the front desk receptionist by name, and took his seat without appearing concerned. Across the room, Jake Morrison watched him carefully. For the first time since Marcus had arrived, Jake seemed less interested in making jokes and more interested in finding answers. "You seem pretty relaxed for somebody walking into a city administration meeting," Jake said. Marcus looked up from a report. "Should I be nervous?" Jake folded his arms. "Most people would be." Marcus smiled slightly. "Most people worry about things they cannot control." The answer lingered in Jake's mind long after he walked away. Shortly before noon, officers began gathering in the Municipal Conference Center located 3 blocks from the station. The building was larger than any meeting space inside the department and was typically reserved for major city events. Rows of chairs filled the room. A stage stood at the front beneath the city seal. As employees entered, they immediately noticed something unusual. Several senior officials were already present. City council members, administrative directors, human resources executives. Even the city manager himself sat near the front. Conversations grew quieter. Whatever was happening, it was clearly important. Sergeant Bill Henderson entered with Ryan Pierce and found seats near the middle of the room. Jake chose a seat several rows closer to the front. Marcus arrived a few minutes later. Instead of sitting with the other officers, he quietly selected a chair along the side wall and waited. Bill noticed several city officials glance toward Marcus as they entered. Each offered a subtle nod. Each received the same polite acknowledgement in return. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. "Tell me you see that," Ryan whispered. Bill nodded slowly. "I see it." More employees continued filling the room until nearly every seat was occupied. Captain Douglas Hart sat near the stage. Unlike everyone else, he looked unusually serious. He checked his watch several times before exchanging a few quiet words with the city manager. At exactly 1 o'clock, the room fell silent. The city manager approached the podium. "Thank you all for attending," he began. "Today marks an important transition for our department and for our community." A ripple of curiosity moved through the audience. Jake leaned forward slightly. The city manager continued. "Over the past several months, extensive evaluations have been conducted regarding leadership, operational performance, and future departmental goals." Bill felt his pulse quicken. Several officers exchanged confused looks. The city manager spoke for several more minutes about professionalism, accountability, and organizational growth. Yet he never explained the purpose of the meeting. The suspense only grew stronger. Finally, he paused and glanced toward Captain Hart. Hart stood and approached the podium. The room became completely silent. "Many of you know that I have served this department for a long time," Hart said. "And after careful consideration, I have decided this is the right moment to retire and begin the next chapter of my life." Audible surprise spread throughout the room. Nobody had expected that announcement. Even Jake appeared stunned. Hart smiled warmly. "This department deserves strong leadership moving forward." Fortunately, that leadership has already been here for several weeks. Bill felt his heart begin to race. Across the room, Marcus remained completely calm. Hart looked toward the side wall. Several heads followed his gaze. Then dozens more. One by one, nearly everyone in the room turned in the same direction. Their eyes landed on Marcus Reed. Confusion immediately swept through the audience. Some officers looked at each other. Others frowned. Jake stared in disbelief. But before anyone could process what was happening, the city manager stepped back to the microphone and said 5 words that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the room. "Please join me in welcoming." The crowd around the gas station kept growing with every passing minute. News of the incident had already spread beyond the small intersection, carried through text messages, live streams, and hurried phone calls. Officer Grant Holloway remained near his cruiser, trying to project confidence, but the strain on his face was becoming impossible to hide. Every few seconds his eyes drifted toward the shattered phone lying beside Naomi. The device had finally stopped ringing, yet somehow its silence felt louder than the sirens that continued to echo across the neighborhood. Across the police perimeter, Elias Cross rose slowly from beside his wife. His movements were calm, controlled, almost unnervingly precise. Several officers watched him carefully, expecting anger, expecting an outburst, expecting something they could react to. Instead, Elias simply adjusted his jacket and looked toward the line of patrol cars blocking the roadway. The afternoon sun reflected from his dark sunglasses, making it impossible to read his eyes. Reporter Hank Soder noticed it immediately. He had covered law enforcement stories for nearly 20 years. He knew what grief looked like. He knew what shock looked like. What he saw in Elias was something different. It was focus, pure focus. A black SUV rolled into the parking lot. Then another. Then a third. Their arrival drew attention from everyone nearby. The vehicles carried no emergency lights and no visible markings. Yet they moved through the crowd with quiet authority. Conversations stopped. Phones shifted toward the new arrivals. Even some of the officers exchanged uncertain glances. The first SUV door opened. A tall man in a dark suit stepped out. He scanned the scene once before walking directly toward Elias. They exchanged no greeting. No handshake. No introduction. The man simply nodded. Elias gave a single nod in return. The entire exchange lasted less than 3 seconds, but it was enough to make several officers visibly uncomfortable. Holloway noticed it too. His confidence slipped another inch. Sergeant Mercer approached him quietly. "Do you know who those people are?" Holloway asked. Mercer shook his head. "No idea. Federal? Maybe." Neither man sounded convinced. The suited arrivals continued moving through the scene. One spoke briefly with the paramedics. Another approached the woman who had been recording near the pumps. Instead of asking for her phone, he handed her a business card and spoke with calm professionalism. Witnesses who had looked frightened moments earlier suddenly appeared reassured. That shift did not go unnoticed. Holloway felt it happening around him. Control was slipping away. Across the street, more media vehicles began arriving. Satellite vans, local reporters, independent journalists. The story was growing faster than anyone could contain it. Every new camera seemed to bring another wave of attention. Every witness had a recording. Every recording appeared to tell the same story. Holloway tried focusing on his report, but his hands would not stop shaking. Then a radio call crackled through the air. One officer listened. His expression changed instantly. Another officer received the same transmission. Then another. Heads began turning toward command vehicles parked farther down the road. Something had changed. Nobody explained what. Not yet. But everyone could feel it. Elias remained motionless near the perimeter tape. The suited man returned and quietly handed him a phone. Elias listened for several seconds without speaking. Whatever he heard caused no visible reaction. He simply replied, "Understood." Then he handed the phone back. Reporter Hank Soder watched the exchange through his camera lens. Years of experience told him that moments like this mattered. Small moments. Quiet moments. The kind that seemed insignificant until the full story emerged later. Nearby, Leah Benton continued recording. She lowered her phone only long enough to wipe tears from her face. "Who are those people?" someone in the crowd asked. Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Not yet. The uncertainty spread through the parking lot like a storm front. Officers who had been confident earlier now avoided eye contact. Supervisors began making calls. Patrol units received new instructions. The atmosphere shifted from routine procedure to something far more serious. And standing at the center of it all, still unaware of the truth that was rapidly approaching, Officer Grant Holloway remained convinced he could explain everything away. He still had no idea that the first official call had already reached Washington, and the response now moving toward him would change everything. The first sign that something extraordinary was happening came from the police command trailer park 2 blocks away. Supervisors who had spent the afternoon directing traffic and managing reporters suddenly stopped talking. Phones appeared. Calls were answered immediately. Voices dropped. Faces changed. At the gas station, nobody knew exactly what had triggered the shift, but everyone could feel it. Officer Grant Holloway certainly could. The confidence he had been forcing onto his face was beginning to crack. Every few moments another officer would glance toward him and then quickly look away. Conversations stopped when he approached. Questions went unanswered. For the first time all afternoon, he found himself outside the circle of information. Across the parking lot, the 3 black SUVs remained parked near the perimeter. Additional vehicles had now joined them. None carried official markings. None displayed emergency lights. Yet every arrival seemed to increase the tension among local law enforcement. Reporter Hank Soder adjusted his camera lens and focused on the newest arrival. A gray sedan rolled quietly to a stop near the command post. A middle-aged woman stepped out carrying a slim black case. Her posture was confident, purposeful. She moved straight toward the suited individuals already on scene. No introductions were necessary. No credentials were displayed. The group immediately began speaking. Whatever was happening, they already knew one another. Witnesses noticed it too. Leah Benton continued recording from behind the caution tape. Her livestream audience had exploded into the thousands. Questions poured into the comment feed faster than she could read them. Who were these people? Why had they arrived so quickly? Why did local officials suddenly seem nervous? Nobody had answers. Elias Cross stood silently near the growing cluster of unmarked vehicles. Several of the newcomers approached him individually. Each conversation lasted less than a minute. Each ended exactly the same way. A nod, a handshake, then immediate action. One person moved toward the media, another toward witnesses. Another toward police supervisors. The organization was impossible to miss. This was not chaos. This was coordination. Holloway finally approached Sergeant Mercer again. Tell me what is going on. Mercer hesitated. I heard something. What? I am not sure. Tell me. Mercer lowered his voice. Word is someone important has taken an interest in this case. Holloway forced out a laugh. Important how? Mercer did not answer immediately. Important enough that calls are coming from places I have never seen involved before. The words settled heavily between them. Nearby, another patrol officer received a radio transmission. His eyes widened. Seconds later, he hurried toward command staff. The atmosphere tightened even further. Then came another development. A helicopter appeared overhead. It remained at a distance, circling slowly. News crews immediately pointed cameras skyward. Witnesses followed. The aircraft carried no local media markings. Its presence only deepened the mystery. Hank lowered his camera and glanced toward Elias again. The grieving husband had not raised his voice once. He had not demanded attention. He had not sought revenge. Yet somehow every important person arriving seemed to gravitate toward him. That detail bothered Hank more than anything else. He had spent years covering powerful people. Powerful people rarely came to others. Others came to them. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, federal-looking personnel began interviewing witnesses one by one. Leah was among the first. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. When it ended, she looked stunned. Not frightened. Stunned. She immediately resumed recording, but said almost nothing to her audience. At nearly the same moment, a senior city official arrived and headed straight toward the command trailer. He entered quickly. 10 minutes later, he exited looking pale. Several reporters rushed forward with questions. He ignored every one of them. The crowd sensed the change immediately. Something larger was unfolding behind the scenes. Something no public statement could yet explain. Then another black SUV pulled into the lot. This one caused an even stronger reaction. The moment it stopped, multiple members of the suited group moved toward it. Local supervisors straightened their uniforms. Command staff gathered near the entrance road. Even the city official returned. The rear passenger door opened. A distinguished older man stepped out carrying no visible identification. Yet the response around him was immediate. Respect. Deference. Urgency. He looked across the entire scene once before his gaze settled on Elias Cross. The two men locked eyes. For several seconds, neither moved. Then the newcomer began walking directly toward him. And all around the gas station, people who still believed they understood this story were about to discover they had only seen the beginning. The older man moved through the crowd without hesitation. Reporters stepped aside. Officers stepped aside. Even city officials who had spent their careers commanding attention suddenly seemed content to wait their turn. The reaction was impossible to ignore. Hank Soder zoomed his camera closer, determined to capture every second. The man finally stopped in front of Elias Cross. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the older man extended his hand. Elias accepted it. Their brief exchange was too quiet for anyone else to hear, but the effect rippled through the entire scene. Several members of the suited team immediately began moving with renewed urgency. Phones appeared. Instructions were given. Vehicles arrived and departed. The operation accelerated. Officer Grant Holloway watched everything from near his patrol car. A cold knot had formed in his stomach. Nothing about this looked normal anymore. He spotted Chief Reynolds arriving at the command trailer and hurried toward him. "Chief, what is happening?" Reynolds barely looked at him. "Not now." "Sir, I need to know." Reynolds finally stopped walking. His face looked exhausted. "Then you should have thought about that earlier." The words hit harder than Holloway expected. Before he could respond, Reynolds disappeared into the trailer. Nearby, Sergeant Mercer stared at the ground. He refused to make eye contact. Holloway felt isolated for the first time since putting on a badge. Across the parking lot, witnesses continued giving statements. Every recording seemed to confirm the same sequence of events. Every new interview made local officials more uncomfortable. Leah Benton finished another conversation with investigators. When reporters approached her, she simply shook her head. "I already gave my statement." "Who are those people?" one reporter asked. Leah glanced toward the unmarked vehicles. "I do not think that is the question everyone should be asking." Her answer only deepened the mystery. As evening shadows stretched across the gas station, a convoy of additional vehicles arrived. This time, several carried federal license plates. Conversations stopped immediately. Officers exchanged nervous glances. The newcomers moved directly toward the command trailer. No one challenged them. No one questioned them. Their authority was obvious. Hank noticed something else. The older man remained beside Elias throughout every development. More importantly, senior officials repeatedly approached the pair rather than the other way around. That detail changed everything. Hank lowered his camera and reviewed his footage. Every instinct told him he was witnessing the center of a much larger story. The tragedy at the gas station was only one piece of it. Somewhere beyond public view, powerful people were responding. The question was why. Then came another shock. A local television station interrupted regular programming to cover the story live. Screens inside nearby businesses displayed aerial footage of the gas station. Social media clips had spread nationwide. Public attention was exploding. The pressure on local authorities increased with every passing minute. Inside the command trailer, voices could occasionally be heard through the open doorway. Arguments, demands, urgent discussions. Nobody looked comfortable. When Chief Reynolds finally emerged, his face had gone pale. Reporters rushed toward him. "Chief, do you have a statement? Is federal oversight involved? Who are the individuals arriving on scene?" Reynolds ignored every question. He walked directly toward Holloway. The officer straightened immediately. Relief briefly crossed his face. Perhaps someone was finally going to explain what was happening. Reynolds stopped only a few feet away. "Turn over your service weapon." Holloway blinked. "What?" Immediately, every nearby conversation stopped. Cameras swung toward them. Holloway looked stunned. "Chief, you cannot be serious." Reynolds did not raise his voice. "Turn it over now." The silence around them became suffocating. Holloway's hands trembled as he slowly complied. Witnesses recorded every second. Officers who had once stood beside him now kept their distance. The reality of the situation finally became impossible to deny. Whatever protection he thought he had was gone. Across the lot, Elias watched quietly. The older man beside him received a phone call. He listened briefly before ending it. Then for the first time all evening, a faint smile crossed his face. He turned toward Elias and said something too quiet for anyone else to hear. Elias nodded once. Meanwhile, dozens of people continued speculating about who he really was. A grieving husband. That part was true, but it was no longer the whole truth. Because hidden behind the growing investigation was a connection so significant that even federal officials were adjusting their schedules. And within the next few hours, that secret would begin emerging into public view.